We've been spending a lot of time this week, really for the last week and a half, talking about the future, talking about the direction the Magic are going to go. And every time I've kind of said that this season is about figuring that part out. So what long and short-term questions do key Magic players have to answer? Well, that's today's episode of Locked On Magic.
You are Locked On Magic, your daily Orlando Magic podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
And you are indeed Locked On Magic. Today is September 27th, 2023. My name is Philip Rossman-Reich. I'm the expert and site editor over at OrlandoMagicDaily.com. You can follow me on Twitter at PhilipRR_OMD. On today's episode of Locked On Magic, we're going to talk about long and short-term questions that the Orlando Magic, and specifically several key players for the Orlando Magic, have to answer this season. These are not questions to put doubt on any players. These are not questions to say that I like or dislike players. These are just simply questions that need answering to figure some things out. We're going to dive a little bit into that and kind of set some storylines for the season to follow. We'll get to that coming up here in just a moment. First, we want to thank you again for making Locked On Magic part of your day every day, no matter when you listen to us, whether it's first thing in the morning, whether it's right when you upload. We truly appreciate you being Locked On Magic part of your day every day. Remember, there's a great Locked On podcast covering every single team in the NBA. Just search for Locked On and the team you're looking for, the Locked On Podcast Network. It's your team every day. Today's episode of Locked On Magic is brought to you by Jase Medical. Empower yourself when you purchase a Jase case, providing you with a personal supply of 5 antibiotics that treat 50-plus infections. Get yours today at jasemedical.com. That's Jase, Jase medical.com. So, I always start with so. This season, I don't want to call it a prove-it season. It's not a do-or-die season. You know, I don't think we're going to sit here and make sweeping and grand conclusions after this season. This season for the Magic is certainly one that everyone is very, very optimistic about and very, very hopeful is the start of something big. But what we're trying to figure out this year, and again, this goes back to our conversation yesterday about the Damian Lillard stuff and talking about Buddy Hield stuff and Cole Anthony stuff, and every question that we ask as we enter the season, it kind of just goes back to one main point. What is this team going to look like when they're competing for a postseason spot? When they're competing for the playoffs, when they're competing for a championship? What we're trying to spend this season figuring out, what we're trying to get at for this season is, what does a successful playoff championship, what does that team look like with Paolo, Banchero, and Franz Wagner? At this point, we think that Paolo and Franz are the guys we're building around. Those are the main pieces of this puzzle. And so everything from here on out is about, okay, how do we maximize those two players? How do we make the most out of those two players? And that's what we're trying to figure out this year. And I would argue that, you know, we're going to talk about some players who are very, very good, but we don't know what they look like at a playoff level. We don't know what they look like in a playoff series. And I'm going to throw some questions out there. And they're really only questions that we can answer in a playoff series. And they're not even questions that maybe we can answer with finality after a playoff series. The big point that I want to make about this season before we get to this season is, we got to see if the Magic can go 82 and make postseason. That's thing number one. Like, I don't want to call this season a failure if they don't make the postseason, but we're going to be flying blind and not necessarily have all the information we need to make some very big decisions without getting to the playoffs. It's a big deal. The Magic win this year, and the Magic do get to the postseason. That is a big deal. You do not know where your team's weaknesses are until you're in a playoff series. The playoffs will reveal every weakness, every flaw in your game. And Paolo needs to experience that so that he understands what he needs to work on and get better at. Franz needs to experience that so he knows what he needs to work on and get better at. You're not seeing that in quick hit one games. In a playoff series, you will see it. We will know, okay, this is the level that Paolo's got to get to. But we will know that about everyone on the roster. And that's kind of where I'm thinking. I mentioned this before on these pods when we talked about the rookies. One of the tensions of this season is trying to manage the short term and the long term. Trying to manage our short-term interests, trying to win games, trying to make playoffs, with long-term interests, trying to develop players, trying to put players in positions and situations that will be advantageous for this team as they start to climb the ladder and start to compete. So there's three players I want to point out specifically. As players I'm really watching this season, players with both short-term questions for how they impact this year's team, long-term questions about what they add to the team overall. And we're going to start with Markelle Fultz. Markelle Fultz had this incredible finish to the season. Markelle Fultz has never been closer to being number one pick Markelle Fultz, and not just because he got the haircut, allegedly. I haven't seen photos of him, Magic's people yet. But he had a career season last year, averaging 14 points per game, 5.7 assists per game, shot 51.4% from the floor overall. Still not a great three-point shooter, but he's willing to take threes. Played in 60 games, only really missed the first 20 because of the toe injury. After the All-Star break, he upped his averages to 15.6 points per game, 6 assists per game, shot 53.3% from the floor, 32.4% from the arc. This is a really, really big step. And while the national media spent a lot saying during the draft, during free agency, saying the Magic need to get a point guard, they need to shore up their point guard spot. A lot of Magic fans went around saying, "You sure about that?" Because Markelle Fultz was really good. Markelle Fultz started to find his bounce again, started to take some pull-up. He started to look more and more like the player he was at Washington. That was a huge step forward for him. And it looked like, who knows? And so this year is, yes, about Markelle Fultz trying to tell us, okay, this is who I am. He's had the first fully healthy offseason of his career. Okay, it's the second fully healthy offseason. No, it is the first fully healthy offseason. The only other offseason that Markelle Fultz entered training camp fully healthy was after the 2020 bubble, which was obviously a shortened offseason. There was COVID restrictions like crazy. We saw how he played those first 8 games. We are expecting big things from Markelle Fultz. And while all of these player rankings and all these position rankings have Fultz in the bottom 10 of starters in the league, and maybe that's fair based on his history, a lot of Magic fans, and I think the Magic themselves, believe Markelle Fultz will take a big leap up, will take a huge step up. I think that's the case. And that's going to be the big question. But the long-term question is the same long question about players on this roster. Can you successfully surround Paolo and Franz if you're not a good shooter? Can you have a starting point guard on a championship team in this league when you're not a great shooter? Look, Rajon Rondo won a championship with the Lakers in 2020. He shot crazy in the bubble that year. But it feels less and less likely that you can survive in the playoffs with guards who can't shoot. We're going to talk about Jalen Suggs at the end of the show here. But this is a critical thing. And ultimately, this is the big question for a lot of the players on the Magic roster. Orlando has built this really funky, weird team. But we don't know what works and what doesn't when we get to the playoffs. And again, that's why getting to the playoffs is so important. like, I'm not sitting here asking this question and asking the questions I'm asking about these players that they can't do it. I'm asking these questions because I don't know. Can Markelle Fultz do it? Absolutely. He is super, super talented. He's starting to come into his own. He's starting to figure things out. If he looks anything remotely like Washington Markelle Fultz, and again, I don't think first overall pick Markelle Fultz is coming back anymore, but that talent doesn't go away. And obviously, Magic fans have seen it, that he's there. Like, he makes all the crazy passes. He's just he plays at this weird rhythm that throws defenses off. He knows, most teams playing off him, and he knows how to suck up that space. That was something that Rajon Rondo was so good at. But we ultimately know how teams will react to him in the playoffs. And at the end of the day, like, we're not measuring the Magic necessarily based off playoff performance yet. But once the Magic do get to the playoffs, that's the measure now. After that first series, we see how, like, Markelle performs, and Markelle's been in the playoffs. So that 2020 playoffs was weird for the Magic. For several reasons beyond the bubble. It was a weird playoff series with the Bucks. We don't know what a playoff Markelle Fultz looks like. We don't know how defenses will defend a Markelle Fultz, and whether that makes Paolo's job harder, Franz's job harder. And that's the ultimate question. That's the ultimate thing that we have to figure out, that we have to find out. And that's what this season. Another player who has a lot of playoff questions is Wendell Carter. We'll talk about him and the long and short-term questions surrounding him coming up here in just a moment. But first, it's time for a quick word from our friends over at Jase Medical. Don't be caught unprepared. It's that simple. We are still in the middle of hurricane season, where we're past the peak of hurricane season, and luckily we've been spared. But in a moment's notice, something could form in the Gulf, something could form in the Atlantic, and while you do get a few days to see the hurricane coming, you got to be ready at any moment until December 1st, when the Atlantic hurricane season ends, to be ready. What happens if you're riding out the storm and you have a moment of pain? Well, solve that pain with Jase Medical. Jase Medical is easy as 1, 2, 3. And you receive a package to deal with infections, to deal with plenty of things. You need to be prepared now more than ever. Jase Medical is simple. You go online, fill out a form, and then you get a prescription, life-saving medications right to your door. The Jase gives you peace of mind, so that you're not just hoping that you have access to medication in an emergency. Jase Medical makes sure you have the medication in. Get $20 off these life-saving antibiotics today from Jase Medical by using my code LOCKEDON at checkout on jasemedical.com. That's Jase, Jase medical.com. Check it out today. Get $20 off again using promo code LOCKEDON at jasemedical.com. Again, I want to preface what I'm talking about on today's show. I like a lot of the players on the Magic. I think there are a lot of things about this Magic team that works really well. I do think that a big thing for the Magic, a big reason why they're going to be better, is just simple maturity. This is a young team learning how to win for the first time. They're going to still make some mistakes. As you get older, those mistakes get lesser. And so, the Magic bet on continuity. They bet on their own internal growth because there's a lot of good players on this team. Depending on which top 100 list you look at, Magic have 3 or 4 guys in the top 100, which is very rare for a team that's got 34 wins. Obviously Paolo, Franz, Wendell Carter, and Markelle Fultz. We'll talk about Wendell here in a minute. You could easily see Cole Anthony breaking into that group with a really long year. Jalen Suggs, I think, has top 100 talent. Anthony Black is could be a really solid player too. There are really good players. There are good players on this team. And so I'm talking about this stuff not to be negative or pessimistic. It's to set the storyline. It's to set the narrative. It's to set the things that I know I'm thinking about and wondering, and want these players to prove. Again, I don't feel like I'm in the conclusion business. I don't like making hard and fast conclusions. I want to ask questions, kind of raise storylines, kind of set the table a little bit, and see how the chips fall. Again, that's kind of what this season is about. Is figuring out how those chips fall. Seeing, yes, Markelle Fultz take another step up. Seeing a Wendell Carter take another step up. But then seeing how they respond and beginning to think about what this looks like when you get to a playoff situation. Because that's ultimately where we want to go. And like Markelle Fultz, I have my questions about Wendell Carter. I have my questions about whether he is the center to make sense of this team. You know, Markelle Fultz is the same way. Is Markelle Fultz the right guy, the right point guard for this team? Do the Magic need a shooter? Well, with Wendell Carter, my question is always, is he the right style of center for this team? Is he the right style of center to win in the playoffs? Look, Wendell Carter is really, really good. He is a really versatile offensive player, able to work the perimeter as well as the interior. He's a great pick and roll partner. I think he settles for threes a little bit too much, but he takes them at a decent clip. There's a lot to like about Wendell Carter. There's a lot to love about him. My question for him is a question that I had throughout the offseason, and the reason why I really put a lot of focus on the backup center position. He's never played more than 62 games in any season of his career. Even during the COVID shortened season in 2021, Wendell Carter would have played only what was equivalent to 62 games. Played 60 games last year. The Magic have him for 5 games. Like he cannot miss time. And he played last season hurt. He was dealing with a plantar fascia issue that led him to a lot of time early in the season, but in December, they missed him. And he will never admit it. It slowed him down. It affected his shot blocking. Wendell Carter, when you look at the numbers, not a particularly strong shot blocker. Averaged less than a block per game. He played 57 games last year. Excuse me. He's a decent shot blocker, but not an above the rim player. To me, that's the inconsistency. According to data from Basketball Index, opponents shot 4.30 percentage points at the rim expected, and Carter's defense saved 0.61 points per 75 possessions. Again, according to data from Index, those are both really good marks. You know, take my word; those are top quarter of the league. But Carter also gave up 64% shooting at the rim, according to data from Second Spectrum. Take all that for what you want. But it tells me is that Carter is an excellent positional defender. We know he's one of the best defenders in the league against guys like Joel Embiid and Nikola Jokic. Both of those players really struggle against him. Just look at the percentages. Both of those players really struggle against him. But Carter is not a shot blocking big, a big rim protecting big. And again, maybe last year was the plantar fascia issue. I think he was at 57, 56%, which is decent for a center 2 years ago. And so you look at the centers around the league, you know, Nikola Jokic is his own deal, but Joel Embiid's a shot blocker. Bam Adebayo is a shot blocker. You know, Robert Williams is a shot blocker. You know, the Knicks just added Celtics added Kristaps Porzingis. The Knicks used Mitchell Robinson. I'm just going through the teams that made the playoffs. Anthony Davis for the Lakers. Jared Vanderbilt for the Lakers. DeAndre Ayton is much more above the rim. I don't think he's as good a defender as Wendell Carter. He's a much more above the rim defender. The Warriors really did well with Kevon Looney last year. Maybe not the true above the rim defender. But those are all guys that play above the rim. Wendell Carter is not that type of athlete. And so while I think he's really, really effective in the regular season, two things have to be proven this year. One, can he stay healthy and be reliable for an 80-team season? Can the Magic get 70 games out of him? Can the Magic get 72, 75 games out of him? They're going to need it. I like Mo Wagner. I like Goga Bitadze. Goga Bitadze is your above-the-rim rim protector. Mo Wagner is the worst rim protector in the league, according to data from Second Spectrum last year. There are ways to defend without being above the rim, but in the playoffs, it sure feels like you need that guy. It sure feels like you need a guy that can go get a block at a big moment. When teams are picking apart your every weakness, positional defense takes you pretty far, but it may not get you the whole way. And again, this is the question. This is the real question the Magic have for the entire season. Who's going to step up in the playoffs? Which of these players is playoff ready? Which of these players is going to be a liability in the postseason that maybe they weren't in the regular season? Which of these players is going to help this team win when it matters most? That's the question of the season. That is the question for the entire year. Is who's going to help this team win in the playoffs? That's, it's not all that matters yet. It's a question we have to ask. And look, Wendell Carter is an excellent defender. I want to reiterate that. He is an excellent defender. He is as big a part of the Magic, one of the best defenses in the league after December 7th last year. If the Magic do end up with the top 10 defense this year, Wendell Carter is going to be a big part of that. I'm not here to throw doubt on Wendell Carter as a defender. But like everyone else on this roster, he's never been in the playoffs. We don't know how teams will attack him. And we don't know if these seemingly inherent weaknesses are things that will become liabilities in the playoffs. And this is the kind of stuff we have to learn this year. Is what works in the regular season, what works in the playoffs. And how do we build a playoff team? No player on this Magic team, though, probably has bigger short or long-term questions than Jalen Suggs. We'll chat about him and the questions he faces coming up here in just a moment. Jalen Suggs, if you ask certain people, Jalen Suggs is the future for this team. This kid's still got a lot of talent. There's a reason he's drafted as high as he was. There's a reason why Magic fans are so excited for what he was. We saw a lot of those reasons play out during the course of his first 2 years. But injuries have obviously slowed him down. Injuries have obviously kept him from being all that he can be and being the player that he can be and everything else. But we still see a player who is incredibly disruptive defensively. One of the best perimeter defenders. I don't in the league quite yet, but certainly one of the best perimeter defenders on this Magic team with the potential to be one of the best perimeter defenders in the league. You look at the small samples, it's like 58 minutes, 55 minutes, something like that. About 3.2 minutes per game. When Suggs was with the starting lineup, defense was incredible. I think it was like a 103 defensive rating. Magic were plus 11 points per 100 possessions when Suggs played with the starting lineup in an incredibly small sample size. A lot of Magic fans believe Jalen Suggs will take the starting spot by the end of this season. And obviously Gary Harris is entering a free agency season. It doesn't feel like the Magic will bring him back. I'm a big Gary Harris fan. They need his shooting more than anything. We'll see. But I get the feeling that the Magic do want to hand the baton off to Jalen Suggs. And this season does feel a little bit like a prove-it season for him. Prove that he can be healthy. Prove what he is in the NBA, because pretty soon the Magic are going to have to pay him. He's got this year, he's got next year, and then it's check time. Then it's time to put your money up. And so I think the Magic are trying to figure out what he is still. And so obviously this season, It's about that. Can Jalen Suggs develop a good enough shot to become an option in the starting lineup? Shot 36% after the All-Star break, 36% from three after the All-Star break. There's something there. There is a there. But yeah, how much there is there? For a poor phrasing of that question. That is so much at the heart of the Jalen Suggs question, because we don't know if Jalen Suggs is just a really good defender who is a streaky shooter, or if he is a potential starting two guard. And while Wendell Carter and Markelle Fultz have to kind of prove themselves on a bigger stage, Jalen Suggs this year has to prove himself on any stage. And look, guy works hard. I'm not here to doubt that he can. I'm here to set the table for whether he can or not. And look, I think Markelle Fultz can answer these questions. I think Wendell Carter can answer these questions. I absolutely think Jalen Suggs can answer these questions. That Jalen Suggs can prove himself to be starter worthy and starter capable. That he can take these next steps. And that the 36% shooting we saw at the end of the season, while there's, some number weirdness in there, that can absolutely be consistent. He can absolutely be a 34-35% three-pointer. And maybe that's not enough to get defenses to stop, ignoring him at the three-point line. But it's enough to get some respect. To obviously create some big games. And he's had some big games where he got hot from three. So he has shown himself already pretty capable. But the question is will Jalen Suggs be a starter? And as we get ready for training camp is a week away, less than a week away now. That is one of the big questions we will be pondering in this month up to the season, in this month lead up to the season. Is Jalen Suggs a starter? Can he be a starter in this league? Can he be a starter for this team? And that's a question we don't know. That's a question, like so many other things, that has to be proven on the court. At the end of the day, success or failure for the Orlando Magic, short and long-term questions, are all going to come out on that court over the next 6 months or next 82 games. We're going to learn so much about this team, what they're capable of, what potential is, where their holes are. We're going to learn so much. And all that I ask is that we understand that the young team is going to make some mistakes still. They're not fully formed. All that I ask is that you be open to the possibilities. Be open to what's to come. And try not to make too many hard and fast conclusions until we see some things play out. That's me, my promise to you. I'm pretty good about not making conclusions. I like asking questions. I like about things. But there are a lot of long and short-term questions and answers to find this year. The short-term questions about, okay, what is this team going to need you to actually make the playoffs? And then there's always the long-term questions of, okay, what does this team actually do when ready to compete for a championship? And all those questions have to be in the background. We have to be thinking about them. Because inevitably we have to start making some decisions and answering them. So keep an eye on it all as we get through this season. I want to thank you all again for listening to today's episode of Locked On Magic. You will find me on Twitter at @PhilipRR_OMD. Subscribe to the podcast on Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, TuneIn, Himalaya, Google Play, Odyssey, and all the places of the podcast to your podcast-enabled listening device. For the latest on the Orlando Magic, be sure to check out OrlandoMagicDaily.com. You can check us out there at OMagic. That's for my everyday crew, for everyone who's listening every day. Tomorrow, we're finally going to talk about the backup power forward situation. Joe Ingles, Jonathan Isaac, maybe some Chuma Okeke, maybe some Jet Howard, maybe some Caleb Houston. Our big training camp question, or our medium training camp question, is how do the Magic handle all their forwards? We'll get to that on tomorrow's episode of Locked On Magic. But until then, for Orlando Magic, Locked On Magic, this has been Philip Rossman-Reich. We'll see you all again next time for another episode of Locked On Magic.